Is Russia moving towards war with Ukraine? That is what we'll be answering on today's video. We're going to take a look at the backdrop to the hostilities between Russia and Ukraine, how things ended up coming to this latest escalation, and what scholars and pundits are saying about the possibility of an all-out conflict between Russia and Ukraine. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Wonderful to be with you as always. We're here to help you every single day make some better sense of this crazy world we're living in, helping you to think better so you can live better in these trying and turbulent times. So I'd appreciate your smacking that bell and subscribe button and also sharing these videos with your friends and loved ones. That'll mean a ton. Before we begin, I'm sure you know, but athletes, celebrities, high performers, you name it, they're all going keto, right? This is the diet that's being praised all around the world because it's widely effective in boosting metabolism, elevating energy, and enhancing mental focus. But for many, it's an extremely difficult diet to follow, cutting out all those carbs, the wonderful breads. Oh. So if you want the benefits of elevated ketone levels, but without actually having to do the difficult parts of the keto diet, then you're going to want Keto Elevate. Now, I use it myself. I put it in my coffee in the morning. It tastes great, curbs my appetite for hours. And if you click on that link below, you can get your very first shipment of Keto Elevate on its way to you right now with a whopping 51% off the regular price. So don't wait. Click on that link below and reap the rewards that Keto Elevate can bring to your life right now, today. All right, gang, let's dive right in here. If you were to survey the international headlines over the last couple of weeks, it would be hard not to conclude that the Russian Federation is preparing to invade Ukraine. Check out some of these headlines, okay? This is from the British Independent. Putin could spark war in Europe by invading Ukraine. Or this from the Kiev Post. Tensions skyrocket as Russia masses forces near eastern Ukraine. From the Sun, the Russians are coming. Russia warns NATO to back down after Putin masses 4,000 troops on Ukraine border, sparking war fears. And this from the Financial Times, Ukraine and its allies try to gauge Putin's appetite for war. So I think you get the point here. If we were just go by these headlines, it would look as if war between Russia and Ukraine were imminent. So what on earth is going on here? Well, to understand the latest escalation between Russia and Ukraine, we actually have to go back several years to the beginning of what is basically a civil war that's broken out in Ukraine. All right, more or less it all started with a gunfight that erupted between police and anti-government protesters in Maidan Square in central Kiev back in 2014. It's all a bit confusing, but the protesters accused the government of opening fire on them and shooting indiscriminately. Whatever the case was, whatever happened, dozens of people were killed. So this prompted a massive backlash among the citizens of Ukraine, which caused then President Viktor Yanukovych to flee the country. So in the midst of this basically anarchistic chaos, Russian forces invaded Crimea in southeastern Ukraine, and the stated purpose was to defend Russia's own national security interests, as well as defend Russians from hostilities in eastern Ukraine. And as we all know, Russia went on to complete its full annexation of Crimea through a referendum. So basically, in case you don't know, eastern Ukraine tends to be very pro-Russian. Upwards of 75% of the population speaks Russian. Many Russians live there. Western Ukraine is very, very nationalistic, on the other hand, very anti-Russian, very pro-European. Only about 5%, as I understand it, speak Russian in Western Ukraine. So in the midst of the Crimean annexation, more pro-Russian Ukrainians began seizing territory in eastern Ukraine, which drew a military response from Kiev and Western Ukraine. And so in order to protect any more of their nation from being annexed, Western Ukraine began cracking down on pro-Russian forces in eastern Ukraine, and hence you really have a full-blown civil war. Now, in the midst of all that, you have this fellow, Petro Poroshenko, okay? He's an ultra-billionaire. Biden was involved with him and all that, but he wins the presidential election, replacing the failed president in exile. Poroshenko goes full Western Ukraine. He embraces the resurgent Ukrainian nationalism in the West. He begins the process of completely separating Ukraine from Russia, including, and this is really important, including, perhaps even most controversially, separating the Ukrainian Orthodox Church from its traditional jurisdiction, which has been for centuries under the Moscow Patriarch. I think it's going 16th, 17th century. Since then, the Ukrainian Church has in effect been an extension of the Russian Orthodox Church. But in response to Crimea, President Poroshenko and the Ukrainian government decided to pursue autonomy from the Russian Orthodox Church, which of course was vehemently opposed by the Moscow Patriarch, who rightly points out that not all in the Ukrainian Orthodox Church wanted that autonomy, and also that Ukraine is home to thousands of Russian churches, hundreds of Russian monasteries that are all predicated on the centuries-old jurisdictional relationship. But they went ahead with it, and now the Ukrainian Orthodox Church is split right along these western-eastern lines. And what we got to understand here is that for many Russians, and I speak as an Orthodox Christian, this is absolute proof that Western powers, particularly centered in D.C., Western powers are actively attempting to further dismantle Russia so as to weaken really the only obstacle to a unipolar world, a world governed by the liberal globalist norms of Washington, D.C.-led West. And so obviously, Russia's taking a very hostile posture towards the West and sees Ukraine as ground zero for whether we're going to have a unipolar world governed by a monolith of Western liberal globalism, or whether we're going to have a more multipolar world where you have a global return to nation, culture, custom, and tradition, where each people group, each nation can, throughout the world, can live freely without coercion from any one unipolar power. So we have to remember that after the Soviet Union collapsed in Christmas of 1991, scholars recognize that almost overnight, we moved away from a bipolar world marked by the two dominant powers of the Cold War, and we instead entered into a unipolar world where the United States was the hands-down dominant superpower, dominant economically, dominant militarily, dominant in international relations. And so really for the next couple of decades, we were clearly a unipolar world. America got used to telling the world basically how to conduct its affairs, and we had no problem imposing a one-size-fits-all vision of life on other nations, tying economic aid to other nations adopting our increasingly woke left-wing norms characteristic of our permanent political class. And we have to understand that Russia wants nothing to do with that world. And they see Ukraine as ground zero, as basically a line in the sand over whether we're going to have a unipolar world for the indefinite future, or are we going to enter into a multipolar future with every country free from the dictates of an increasingly woke DC monolith. So there's much more that can be said, but that in a nutshell is the basic gist of how fighting broke out in Ukraine and Russia's involvement in it and the various complexities involved. So are we seeing a full-blown war about to erupt between Russia and Ukraine? Well, before we answer that, make sure to click on the link below and register for our upcoming New Conservative Patriot Live Benefit Conference, which we're holding this weekend, Friday and Saturday, on April 16th and 17th. It's a virtual conference. You don't even have to leave the comfort of your own home, and you can secure your own seat, your sofa, simply by clicking on the link below. We're going to be focusing on how you and I can together rise up against woke cancel culture and build back the world that we know and love together. We're going to be answering a question that patriots have been asking for months. What do I do? And I know that things are moving in our direction. I know that the liberalism is more unpopular than ever before. I know patriot movements and leaders are springing up all over the world. But in the meantime, here with bumbling Biden, what do we do? And what appears to be for the very first time ever, we're going to devote an entire 2-day conference to answering that very question on what you can do to secure your freedom from woke insanity once and for all. Now, tickets are going fast. Seating is limited. So if you want to secure your seat, make sure to click on that link below because ticket prices are going up right before the Patriot Live event this Friday. So do not miss it. Click on that link below, and I'll see you for a weekend that promises to be a game changer in our lives like never before. All right, so what are we to expect between Russia and Ukraine? It's a very, very concerning situation, no question with that, with Russia currently building up their forces to an estimated 40,000 on the eastern border of Ukraine and about 40,000 in Crimea. Many pundits recognize that that troop number does not represent a massive invasion force, okay? Instead, as Paul Robinson, professor of Russian studies at the University of Ottawa, has argued, it looks more like a Russian buildup specifically designed to deter any furthering of Ukrainian hostilities in the Donbass region. Now, of course, the danger in this buildup is that it could provoke Ukrainian forces, which are being bolstered by supportive rhetoric coming from bumbling Biden in D.C. and from NATO. Ukrainian forces could justify an attack on rebel forces in Donbass by making it appear that they're acting in self-defense against imminent Russian aggression. The problem with that scenario is that few pundits believe that, despite its rhetoric, either DC or NATO would involve Western troops in this conflict. That's frankly the last thing they want to actually get involved with. Their rhetoric may be designed to intimidate Russia, but it's almost certainly all bark and no bite, and Russia knows that in terms of the West. Plus, military experts widely agree that there's little chance of success for Ukrainian forces to launch a successful offensive against pro-Russian forces without massive civilian casualties. And mass civilian casualties, particularly Russian civilians living in eastern Ukraine, is all the excuse that Russia would need to intervene. And as a result, not only would you have an all-out war between Russia and Ukraine, a war that Ukraine almost certainly could not possibly win, but Russia would end up only permanently annexing even more Ukrainian territory as part of an ever-expanding Greater Russia. So it seems to me that it really comes down to bumbling Biden on this one. If Biden makes it clear to President Zelensky that Ukraine has their full support and will use the full force of Western diplomatic power against Russia short of military action, then Ukraine is going to pull back and avoid an armed conflict. If, however, the Biden administration sends mixed messages, like it apparently is doing through the U.S. Secretary of Defense, then yes, a war is indeed possible. And given that this comes down to bumbling Biden, I, for one, am hardly confident on the outcome. Now, before you go, make sure to like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to my channel. Definitely click on the link below and check out some of our awesome merch. And you also definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on how the mainstream media tries to gaslight the Minnesota riots. All this urban violence is red-pilling more Americans than ever. You're not going to want to miss it. So make sure to click on the link, and I will see you over there. God bless.